Greetings, class of 2024. Hi, I'm Mr. Moore. What you're going to see right now is an educational video from the class of 2023 that they compiled at the end of their Apush experience. What you're about to take a look at is all 9 periods summarized and all major topics summarized in a special way that only our Apush students can deliver. Use these videos throughout the year to help you understand the key concepts of each period, but also see this as a thank you from the students that have come before you. I'm Mr. Moore, and enjoy the video.
Good evening, and welcome to your daily dose of history. Today we'll be covering period 1 from 1491 through 1607. Only 5% will be covered on your AP exam. Before Europeans' intervention in the New World, we had many different native tribes inhabiting the Americas. Their agriculture consists of corn, beans, and wild fruits. We had names such as the Takawa tribe, who were a nomadic, others such as the Chickasaw tribe lived in permanent settlements. However, soon, with the arrival of Columbus in the Bahamas in 1492, the natives would drastically change. For this period, it is important to know these key concepts: colonization, ecomedia system, God-Gold glory, Spanish caste system, Columbian exchange, slave trade, lead me, follow me, or get the heck out of my way. Native tribes have been in North America for 10,000 years, where they evolved to thrive in difficult regions. For example, in the Southwest, that now includes New Mexico and Arizona, natives evolve multi-faith societies supported by the farming with irrigation systems. In addition, in the Midwest, settlements were supported by hunting fish and agriculture. They were even famous for their large Garthwell mounds they created. After a land route to Asia had become blocked in 1453, the Spanish were desperate to find a new way to get in India. An Italian explorer and navigator, Christopher Columbus, persuaded his shortcut to the rulers of Spain. In approval, he set out to find India, but unknowingly, he came to find the Bahamas. Afterwards spread, but soon every European came to search for opportunities. This led to English, Spanish, French, Dutch to develop different communications with the natives. The English, get the hell out of my way; Spanish, follow me; French and Dutch, lead me. The newly discovered crops found in Northern America lead to an exchange between Native Americans and Europeans called the Columbian Exchange. In return for the crops, Europe brought their own livestock crops and diseases. Because of this, native population soon began to decline, now leading down toward Latin American. The Spanish were fueled by their own goals that were God-Gold glory. In more depths, they tried to spread their religion by forcing the path of Christianity onto the natives, and also sought for gold and riches for them and their rulers. And finally, they also desired fame for their conquest. While in search of goods, the Spanish needed more men for labor. The influence of the Spanish caste system, where natives were the lowest rank and the highest were the Iberian Spanish aristocrats, gave the Spanish the idea to use the natives as their own slaves, known as the Ecodemian system. Unfortunately for them, due to the diseases brought overseas, natives were dying out fast, and it was no help that the native knowledge of their own land made it easy for them to escape. In the end, they ended up bringing African slaves through the system of the Atlantic slave trade. Cultural interactions between Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans. Soon enough, the Americans were being filled with enslaved Africans and replaced the natives as they were more resistant to diseases and less familiar with the New World, meaning they were less likely to escape. As for the natives, by this point, the once prospered and cultural native tribes across the Americas were now reduced to the last few standing, and even then they were struggling with diseases and the loss of their people. Unfortunately for them, it would only get worse as Europeans were now starting to plan their own settlements in the New World. Going back to the English, they had now developed a hostile and enemy relationship with the natives. The English did not want anything to do with them, and instead saw them as inferior and in their way of gaining more land. Now, time for a good old mystery story. In the 15,000s, the English set down their first settlement in Roanoke Island, but because of constant native attacks and a shortage of food, it disappeared during the most extreme droughts in the previous 800 years. More about English colonization can be found in Unit 2 of AP History. That is all.
The first chapter that we're going to cover in period 2 is European colonization, which includes the Europeans, which one is the British. The British came to escape religious persecution. The Spanish came to spread religion. And the French and the Dutch came for the money, which includes the fur trade. They came for a better life and to improve their economic growth. The next chapter we will be covering is the regions of the British colonies, which consisted of 3 regions. The first one is the New England region. The second one is the Middle region, and the third one is the Southern region. In New England, they made ships, and they also made fish. Now, we're going to talk about the Middle colonies. In the Middle colonies, or in the Middle region, they based themselves on agriculture, which they planted wheat, and they were also known as the bread colonies. But in the Southern colonies, they were also like the Middle colonies, which they based themselves on agriculture. But the only difference was that they planted tobacco, they planted cotton, rice, and indigo. Hello, my name is Miguel, and this is my fellow companion Anderson. Today we will be talking about period 2, the colonial period, and they will be covering from 1607 to 1763. And this will cover 10% of the Apush curriculum. And if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get started. Before we get into period 2, we're going to talk about the context. The Europeans came to the New World, also known as the Americas, to colonize America, with the sole purpose of the 3 Gs: God, gold, and glory. They came here to get riches, they came here to colonize and to get glory through it, to get power. They also came to spread their religion. But through this, they created caste systems. And through this caste system, many were oppressed and they were kicked out of their land. The key concepts for period 2 is joint stock, triangular trade, Middle Passage, Bacon's Rebellion, Proclamation of 1763. Hello? The next chapter we'll be covering is the transatlantic trade. This consists of 10 to 12 million slaves coming to the Americas through the Middle Passage, which was a form of transportation from Africa to the Americas. Also, there was something called the triangular trade, which was between 3 major countries: the Americas, the Europeans, and the Africans. The next chapter we will be covering is slavery in the British colonies. African Americans were made slaves, and they worked in large plantations. Through this, and what is the messed up part, is that peculiar institutions classified blacks as slaves, making them a minority. Through this, slaves didn't back down. They did cover and over rebellions, such as Stonewall's Rebellion and Bacon's Rebellion. The last and final chapter we will be covering is the colonial society and culture. In this chapter, the first Great Awakening happened, also known as the Religious Revival, in which it made the colonists more religious and more spiritually connected. This period is the leading cause of the tension between the colonists and the Native Americans, leading to the 7-Year War. And finally, further down the line, it will lead to independence.
3, 2, one. Good luck, everybody.
Anderson, any last words?
Now this is Washington's farewell address, where he says goodbye America, goodbye work, and hello freedom at home. Yeah. His farewell address warned people of foreign alliances and political parties. My battery's gonna die. Which now we have these people ignoring the warning and just doing whatever they want. So we have Hamilton and Jefferson. Hamilton being a Federalist and Jefferson being a Republican. There were strong debates with states versus government powers. Of course, America's independence was amazing and all, but the end of the American Revolution led to more revolts in other countries, like France and Haiti. There's an empty pause here, so I'm just going to say that my art is amazing and should not be made fun of because those stick figures, I put so much effort into them. Now, greater equality was pushed for ladies and slaves, but slavery was postponed because of reasons, parentheses, didn't want another war so soon, parentheses. September 17, 1787. Constitution was written with a lot of compromise to appease both sides. The Constitution consisted of 1. Great Compromise, which meant representation in Congress. 2. The 3/5 rule, which meant slaves only counted as 3/5 of a person. Weird. And 3. Slave trade could not end before 1808. The ratification of the Constitution was only passed when the Bill of Rights was put as the first 10 amendments by the Federalists towards the Anti-Federalists. Now the real question is, how did colonists even win the war? I know, really weird. Anyways, familiarities due to them living on the land gave them the win. Also, great leaders such as George Washington, with my great drawing of George Washington, by the way. No laughters. Don't know why they added the picture. Lastly, there was big help from the French after the Battle of Saratoga. It's July 4th, 1776, Independence Day. The Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, announcing the colony's separation from Great Britain. Amazing fireworks, if I do say so myself. I tried my hardest. I even erased some many times. Now on to the AOC, Articles of Confederation, which 1. Created the official name of the U.S., United States of America. 2. State governments still had no power, now listed in the AOC. And 3. All states protected each other. Now let's make fun of the AOC, which 1. Had a weak central government. 2. Could not tax. And 3. Left most, if not all, power to the state. Hello humans, welcome to period 3 of your Apush course. In today's video, we will be covering time period 1754 to the 1800s. This period will take up 12% of your Apush exam. During 1607 through 1754, there was the founding of Jamestown. This is the first successful British colony. Furthermore, British colonization created tension with natives and their French allies, bringing forth the 7-Year War. Regional conflict between the French and the British started over land dispute in the upper part of the Ohio River Valley. French were able to gain support from the natives because the natives were against British colonization. In no particular order, we'll be covering these key terms: Constitution, Articles of Confederation, Federalist Papers, Bill of Rights, and Intolerable Act.
Wait, did it start? Hello, welcome to the fourth episode of Apush Review. Today we will summarize key points pertaining to Jeffersonian and Jacksonian democracy. Thus, some standards will go unnamed, but they are just as important to the curriculum, so keep that in mind. Period 4 covers about 10 to 17% of the Apush exam and goes over the time period between 1800 and 1848. Some relevant vocabulary terms surrounding Period 4 are the Louisiana Purchase, Marbury versus Madison, which establishes judicial review, the War of 1812, which then goes on to the era of good feelings, sectionalism, the American system, industrialization, the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Indian Removal Act, and urbanization, just to name a few.
Madam.
For many of us, we only know Thomas Jefferson because of his role of a founding father and his face on the $20 bill. But in order to know more about his impact in the development of the newly independent United States of America, we have brought Darla, an Apush certified student. So Darla, what is the context leading up to Period 4?
Of course, I'm very happy to be here today. Colonists had faced several abuses of power from the British Parliament, such as taxation without representation, and they were very fed up. They attempted to organize themselves for rebellion on April 19, 1775. The American Revolutionary War began that day. Ultimately, the United States won its independence from Great Britain and now were tasked with cultivating their own central government and national identity. During Jefferson's administration, he pushed for an agrarian future, one where farmers were the heart of America's economy. However, the Federalist Party opposed Jefferson's view and advocated for an industrialized economy. As a result, two parties had formed, the Federalists and the Jefferson's Democratic Republicans. For example, the Federalists had supported a strong central government. They feared mob rule, and they wanted loose constructionists, which was like an interpretation of the Constitution, which was like looser. They favored the National Bank, and they wanted an economy based on manufacturing and shipping, so like mass production. And their supporters were manufacturers, lawyers, merchants, and clergy members. And the Democratic Republicans wanted a limited national government, which is very different from Federalists because they wanted a strong central government. They feared the rule of one person or powerful few elite, like presidents and stuff like that. They were strict constructionists, meaning that their interpretation of the Constitution was very up to rule. Everything was they weren't Federalists in the way that they wanted a loose interpretation of the Constitution. They opposed National Bank, and they wanted an economy based on farming and agriculture, aka agrarian yeoman farmer society, and the supporters were farmers and tradespeople.
So, how did the split in political parties affect the American people?
Well, political ideologies often stem from regional livelihood. Northerners aligned with Federalists because they supported manufacturing, which the North heavily relied on in their industrialist society. However, Southerners supported Democratic Republicans because they advocated for an agrarian future, which benefited the South as their economy was based on plantations and farming and farms.
It is commonly known that Jefferson broke his strict constructionist view on the Constitution when it came to the Louisiana Purchase. Can you describe that conflict?
Of course. The Louisiana Purchase was the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory from France under Napoleon. Sent on the behalf of Jefferson, diplomat James Monroe spoke with Napoleon, to which Napoleon offered to give the United States the Louisiana Territory for $15 million, an offer which Monroe had accepted. This effectively doubled the size of the United States, so if you imagine the United States being big as hell already, it was 2 times bigger. However, the purchase was controversial because Thomas Jefferson was a strict constructionist, and nothing in the Constitution gave the president the power to buy land.
Okay. Fast forwarding to the election of 1824, can you explain why Democratic Republican candidate Andrew Jackson called the victory of Adams a corrupt bargain?
Yes, of course. Jackson had won the popular vote, but because there were so many candidates and none won the electoral vote, the president had to be chosen by the House of Representatives. Henry Clay, a well-known Federalist, happened to be the Speaker of the House and openly supported John Quincy Adams. As a result, Adams was chosen for president. However, Jackson and his supporters saw these actions as corrupt and unfair and called it a corrupt bargain. However, he would reign victorious in the election of 1828.
Can you describe Jackson's presidency?
Yes, I can. Jackson presented himself as a common man, a president that would protect the people from abuses of power, and that was what the trend was for the years oncoming which was appealing to the common man for, I guess, upcoming presidents. However, his actions did not show that. Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which started the forced removal of Native Americans from their traditional homelands. In the Trail of Tears, many Native Americans died because of illness and starvation, and it was a very cruel act. Furthermore, when Jackson introduced the tariff of 1828, which raised import tariffs by 50%, South Carolina threatened secession. The tariff largely benefited northern manufacturers and western farmers because it protected their industries. Southerners disliked it because it relied on imported goods. As a result, John C. Calhoun, Jackson's vice president, developed the doctrine of nullification, which gives states the right to nullify any law that they deemed unconstitutional.
And what were people's reactions to Jackson's actions?
One notable reaction came from the Whig Party, a rebranded version of the Federalists, who strongly opposed Andrew Jackson. Jackson was considered to be a tyrant from the Whig point of view because they believed Jackson had too much power. Jackson kept utilizing the executive branch to pass his own legislation and vetoed laws he just didn't like. The Whigs often called him King Andrew because his actions resembled the British Parliament's abuse of colonies in the previous period, which were like the 13 colonies.
And can you cite more examples of Jackson's corrupt nature?
Yes, Jackson had a spoils system in which he gave his supporters government positions in exchange for votes or political favors, which only added to his bad reputation among the Whig Party, which means that, like, if you supported him, you would get, like, jobs inside the government without having to go through, like, tests or anything like that. You would just get accepted because you supported him, which was very corrupt. Additionally, he had one of the largest veto counts in American history, 12. Most of these vetoes were solely of legislation he simply did not like.
The Second Great Awakening then took place soon after Jackson's presidency. What were the effects?
Well, the Second Great Awakening promoted religious revival in the 19th century America, which then gave birth to many reform movements. Most notable movements were the abolitionist movement, which strived to end slavery, prohibition, where many women advocated for the banning of alcohol and hated alcoholism, and the women's rights movement that championed women's suffrage and rights, obviously.
Lastly, could you elaborate on how Period 4 set the stage for Period 5?
Of course, the purchase of the Louisiana Territory fueled Americans' Manifest Destiny ideology, where they basically believed it was Americans' God-given right to expand westward. However, with the North and the South being so different in terms of beliefs and economic dependence, sectional tensions grew over the expansion of slavery. Basically, a buildup of all these tensions led to the Civil War.
Hi, Yuri.
Hey, Alicia.
You want to talk about the Period 5 Civil War?
Yeah, the one that starts from 1844 to 1877.
Yeah, the one that takes up 30% of the AP exam.
The one that talks about expanding west and the north is industrial while the south is more with slavery, which causes compromise. And the south didn't vote for Lincoln because they were worried he would end slavery.
Yeah, and vocabulary concepts that you could put in are Mexican-American War, sectionalism, Manifest Destiny, Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Missouri Compromise, election of 1860, black codes, and so much more.
5.2 Manifest Destiny. Intensified by expansion and deepening regional divisions, debates our slavery and economical, culture, and political issues that led into the nation's Civil War.
Another major topic, 5.4, Compromise of 1850, allowed California to enter the Union as a free state, divided the rest of Mexican secession into territories such as New Mexico and Utah, ended slavery in Washington, D.C. The nation's capital, Congress, said it had no power to completely ban slavery, included strict fugitive state law. It settled a border dispute between Texas and New Mexico.
Great, so another major topic is the 5.7 of 1860 insertion. The southern states were outraged over Lincoln's victory because they believed it would abolish slavery in the United States, and they believed that Lincoln had not won the election.
We can also bring up another major topic from 5.8, which is military conflict in the Civil War. Civil War was a total war because it involved every aspect of society. The South needed Europe's support and gave Great Britain their cotton, but Egypt and India made them faster. Great Britain left the South without support.
Then a contraband was a naval blockade and the South couldn't have the ability to trade or receive resources.
Can this also lead into 5.10 Reconstruction? The United States grappled with the challenges of integrating into the Union and states that had succeeded and determining the legal status of African Americans. Wait, so out of curiosity, what led to the next period?
Well, the failure of Reconstruction led to the Gilded Age, in which it created economic growth. As the United States jumped to the lead in industrialization ahead of Britain, the nation was rapidly expanding its economy into new areas, especially heavy industries like factories, railroads, and coal mining.
Welcome to our show. My name is Litzy and this is
Esther, and our co-workers will cover period 6 from 1865, and this will cover 30% of the AP exam.
Now we pass you on to the man, the myth, the all-American, Clever.
No, seriously, stop. Okay. So, period 6. After the Civil War ended, the northern and the western economies industrialized so much that they intertwined their economies together, which led to significant development in manufacturing and production, but also in new business practices, which all led to what we call monopolies, basically corrupt practices that basically didn't serve the poor and basically left them in terrible working conditions, harsh living conditions, and honestly just a bunch of corruption in politics.
Hi, it's Ebony. Today I'm going to say the key concepts of period 6. Some key concepts are barbarians, the corrupt business practices, monopoly, and attempts to regulate business. And now I'm going to pass it on to me. Today I'm going to be talking about 6.2, cultural and social development. And this, the U.S. went into a period of industrial growth. For the first time, Americans began living in urban areas. However, they had more exposure to diseases, terrible living conditions. In the factory setting, they had unfair wage labor, prone to injuries, and worst of all, child labor. And now, back to the man himself, Clever.
The rise of industrial capitalism. This period also introduced new technological production techniques such as Taylorism and interchangeable parts, which brought manufacturing to new heights because of the rapid manufacturing. However, due to these new techniques, it also brought on corrupt business practices as well, such as vertical and horizontal integration used by Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller respectively, because new industries such as oil and steel were made profitable due to new industrial and production techniques. And now to pass it on.
Hi, it's me, Jocelyn. Today we're talking about 6.7, labor in the Gilded Age. And this is the continuation of the Second Industrial Revolution. And this made a transition from farming to people working in the factories. Where they seek economic opportunities. However, this led to them being exploited by people like robber barons, in which they faced harsh working conditions, low wages, and women and children working in these factories. However, this all soon changed as they soon fought for.
Now back to me. Although not all was bad in the Gilded Age, there's movements like the Knights of Labor, the American Federation of Labor, which aimed for better work conditions for labor unions. This will plant a seed for the Progressive Era and the early 20th century. Now to me.
6.13, politics in the Gilded Age. And during this time, it was one of the lowest points in America, with issues like terror, poverty, and corruption, and people like political machines who would bribe people for votes, and their main target would be immigrants. However, there's also two parties at this time, Republicans who supported big businesses and protected terrorists, and Democrats who were opposed of these protected terrorists.
And this brings the end to the lowest point in American politics, what Mark Twain describes as the Gilded Age. With the election of William McKinley in 1896, the United States placed itself into the international stage, now interfering with foreign affairs rather than being the isolated country that it once was and what it wished to be with George Washington. Now,
Thank you for tuning in to our show.
We'll see you next time.
And AP Go.
First, it's important to understand how America got here. We have long lived by the preconceived notion of manifest destiny, our God-given right to expand westward. We've recently come away with reaching the Pacific with the victory of the Mexican-American War in the late 1840s. These sentiments were furthered with the purchase of the island of Alaska in 1867. However, the big difference being this is all domestic action. To pronounce itself a superpower, it has to have influence on foreign nations.
Hey.
We ate! We ate!
No, get that shit at the same time. No.
Okay, it starts with the Spanish-American War. It ended Spanish colonial rule in the Americas and resulted in U.S. acquisition of new territories. Additionally, with the justification of the Monroe Doctrine, it expanded its military powers into Latin America. Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy had its influence in the building of the Panama Canal and pushed the British out of the Americas. Taft's dollar diplomacy waged itself in the Asian continent. I'm out of breath. What'd you say? Oh!
Alright, next. Throwing it back. My bad. Oh. You did that.
In contrast to their imperialistic policies, the country decided a movement or different reform movements that took place at the turn of the 20th century until World War I were directly caused by industrialization and urbanization. This movement sought to improve life in the industrial age by making moderate political changes and social improvements through government action. They wanted to limit the power of corporations, improve democracy so it benefited people, and strengthen justice.
I think he's an IA though.
Between the reparations of the First World War and the equally famous Great Depression, the country saw an economic boom like never before, the Roaring Twenties. This was in large part due to the severe rise in manufacturing output. Government policy favored big business and did nothing to enforce the antitrust laws put in place during the Progressive era, and offered corporate tax cuts. A Republican-controlled 20s, some would say. The impact of the automobile and the consumer economy paid equal importance to this drastic change in society. By the late 20s, almost every American family owned a car to buy that car. Alongside many desirable items at the time, Americans diverted to credit. They began to purchase things that they couldn't afford to pay. However, despite the Roaring 20s in the urban area, farmers didn't share that equal prosperity. When wartime ended, their best years did as well. Implementing certain economic policies such as buying on credit and installment buying would soon lead the U.S. into a devastating economic recession. The stock market crashed, and as the price of the dollar dropped, many people panicked and took their money out of the banks, causing them to close down. As a result of the chaos, Franklin Roosevelt attempted to remedy the issue by implementing his New Deal plan, which focused on recovery for a damaged nation. He employed new systems that helped the working class, who were struggling the most, hardly being able to put food on the table. After a somewhat successful series of economic reforms, FDR soon gained popularity and trust from the people. He then implemented the Second New Deal, which focused on relief and reform. He was able to pass any bill he wanted since he was popular, and he made many positive changes that most people agreed on, except for a bill that led him to appoint a new justice. The people saw this as an abuse of power. People argue on the FDR's effectiveness when remedying the Great Depression. However, it is undeniable that World War II ultimately got us out of the Great Depression. Our last and final video is going to be about World War II, the most famous of wars on the planet, a war described as fascism democracy. It's important to note that however big our influence was in the Allies' ultimate victory, in the war it wasn't always like that. Following World War I, sentiments around no war at any cost was high. It was believed that our entry in the First World War was a big mistake. Pearl Harbor pushed out hands. To finance this war, the Americans faced for the first time an income tax. This war also impacted African Americans at home. They migrated out of the South and into urban society in search of new jobs and opportunities. Smith v. Albright was a big judicial victory that protected African Americans' right to vote in the primaries. On the war front, the American goal was to disrupt German submarines aimed in the Atlantic whilst continually bombing German cities, also having a daunting task to push them out of the Mediterranean in North Africa. The most famous parts of this time in history are D-Day and the first and second and only uses of the atomic bomb in history. D-Day being the British, Canadian, and U.S. assault on the Normandy coast, led by General Eisenhower. This was the start of the pushback of German forces and eventually liberating France, Nagasaki, and Hiroshima, costing about 350,000 deaths in both cities and surrounding.
Hello, future AP US History students. Today, we'll be introducing you to Period 8 of the AP US History curriculum. This period lasts from 1945 through 1980, and about 15% of it will cover the AP exam. Alright, let's get right into it. Alright, so first order of business. The context leading into Period 8. World War II had just came into its conclusion. Had just finished, and now we had two emerging superpowers. You had the USSR and the United States. The Soviet Union took control of the Eastern Bloc, and communism was a constant threat now in the world. And so all of this created the Cold War, which is now part of Period 8. And so let's get into Period 8. Alright, key concepts and vocab of Period 8. Cold War, a huge one. Vietnam War, that's another one. You have Watergate, you have civil rights movements, and the Great Society. Those are some key concepts during this Period 8. Alright, so let's talk about the first major topic of this period, the Cold War. What happens here? We have the space race. Basically, the Soviet Union and the United States try to fight for whoever gets to space first. There's also nuclear weapons, the arms race. The US once again wants to fight the Soviet Union to have better nuclear weapons. And then later on we get stuff like SALT, which is Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, which eases tensions from the Cold War. But that's towards the end of Period 8. So, alright, so for the second major topic, we have the Vietnam War. This lasted for around 2 decades, and what you should know is the war against communism. Part of this falls into the domino theory, which President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave to us, that if Vietnam fell, all of Asia would quickly fall under communism. Other stuff about it is that once the Vietnam War ended, the US lost a lot of money. And it was basically a non-profitable war for the US, a war like no other. So get ready for the Vietnam War, because it's a big one. Alright, third major topic of Period 8, the Great Society. Lyndon B. Johnson's reforms sought out to have better education, better jobs, better wages for every single American. Obviously, priorities were for white people. But Lyndon B. Johnson was a president who strived for equality, stuff like that. And so, yeah, you can kind of associate the Great Society with the New Deal. But yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about the Great Society so far. Alright, so fourth major topic of period 8, the Civil Rights Era. For this, we have, obviously, African Americans want better rights in the United States. And so figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, they all rise to the occasion to make America a more equal place for people of color. And so, yeah, I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, as it speaks to every one of us. And yeah. So for this one, we're gonna be combining the 5th and 6th major topics of period 8, because they're all part of great scandals that happened in the United States of America during this period. Assassinations, we had major assassinations like those of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and the two Kennedy brothers, obviously the president and Senator Kennedy as well. And then we also have the Watergate scandal. Nixon rigged the election, and a whole lot of scandals occurred thanks to that. And what this caused was disloyalty to the government. And so this is a big major turning point in the United States, because no longer was the government fully trusted by the American people. Alright, so into period 9, Cold War tensions ease, and the civil rights movements give headway for future movements, for example, gay rights and other stuff. Anyways, that'll be all, and good luck next year in Apush.
Hello, my name is Axel.
Hello, my name is Ricardo.
Over to period 9, that takes up 5% of the context and goes from the 1980s to present day.
After World War II, the Big Four assembled for the Yalta Conference, which would influence the United States for the years to come. From that conference and forthwith, the Second Red Scare commenced, initiating the age of anti-communism, a sentiment that stained the presidency, economy, and history.
Well, appearing in the form of the knight and striding armor was Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party, which opposed the weakness of democratic dynasty of his predecessors.
The Reagan era included ideas and personalities beyond Reagan himself. With his election came the rise of conservatism after the catastrophes of the previous Democratic presidents. It also initiated a recession in which was caused by Reagan's supply side economics, Reaganomics, through a push to defeat the Soviet Union in an arms race. He is usually characterized as the leader of a broadly based conservative movement whose ideas dominated national policy making in areas such as taxes, welfare, defense, the federal judiciary, and the Cold War.
The end of the Cold War. It was a lessening of tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Nixon passed for trade relations and a limited military budget. In Eastern Europe, the end of the Cold War was ushered in an era of economic growth and a large increase in the number of liberal democracies. While in other parts of the world, such as Afghanistan, independence was accompanied by state favor.
Migration and immigration in the 1990s and 2000s. This is the case even though there was a net decline in jobs in the decade. In contrast, from 1990 to 2000, job growth was 22 million and 13.2 million new immigrants arrived. Immigrants come for many reasons, such as desire to join relatives or to access public services. Like most immigrants that came before them, early 20th century immigrants came to better their lives.
Challenges of the 21st century. So, rapid population increase, climate change, growing inequality, diversity, antibiotic resistance, an aging population, and the future of work are related to the challenges of the 21st century.
Just a fabulous job well done. Shout out to class of 2023 for coming out and summarizing periods 1 through 9. This will aid my upcoming Apush class coming in for next year. You guys ever have any questions or concerns? You guys have the work already summarized for you. There's no excuses. It's time to get to work. Can't wait to see you in August.